She thought she was meeting a friend's cousin for coffee until the man in the wheelchair looked up and said, "You don't have to stay, if it's out of pity." The sentence hung between them like cold air. Harper froze with her hands still clutching her phone. Outside, the rain smeared the windows of the cafe, turning the reflections of people into watercolor shapes. She blinked once, then twice, trying to match the voice with the person in front of her. He was younger than she expected, early 30s, maybe 33, with hair that was too perfect for the weather and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. His name, according to the text from her best friend Lena, was Eli. Harper had pictured someone ordinary, maybe a shy tech guy, who needed help socializing. Not this man with a presence so controlled, it felt rehearsed and painful at the same time. For a second, Harper considered turning around and leaving, pretending she had walked into the wrong cafe. But something about his tone stopped her. It wasn't self-pity. It was warning. He wasn't testing her kindness. He was protecting himself. She straightened her raincoat and said quietly, "I'll stay because I already ordered coffee." The faintest curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. He gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Most people leave," he said without looking up again. "Then I guess I'm not most people," she replied. The answer slipped out faster than she meant. For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered with something like surprise. Then he nodded, as if that was enough permission to let the conversation begin. The cafe hummed around them, the low murmur of keyboards and rain against glass. Harper wrapped her hands around her cup, the warmth grounding her, while she tried not to stare. The wheelchair looked expensive, built from matte black metal, the kind of design that whispered money, not hospital. The man himself was composed, wearing a charcoal suit and a watch that could probably pay her rent for a year. He noticed her glance. "Go ahead," he said dryly. "Stare all you want." "I know what you're thinking." I doubt that she answered. "You're thinking this isn't what you signed up for, that your friend tricked you." She hesitated. "Maybe. Then she's right." He sighed, glancing toward the window. "I didn't want this either. My assistant thought it would be a good idea. Social exposure therapy, he called it." Harper bit her lip, trying to decide whether to laugh or apologize. Instead, she said, "So we're both victims here." He looked back at her, this time really looked, and the guarded humor in his eyes softened. "Victims sounds dramatic. Maybe we're just participants." The word hung there between them, balanced between sarcasm and sincerity. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. Harper took a sip of her latte and said, "Tell me what you do when you're not being socially experimented on." A small smirk crossed his face. "I build things, like what things that help other people move when they can't." She raised an eyebrow. "That's ironic. That's the point," he said. The briefest pause. "Before the accident, I built products for investors. Now I build them for people who actually need them." Something in the way he said accident made Harper's stomach tighten, but she didn't ask. Instead, she said, "That's admirable." He tilted his head slightly, as if testing whether she meant it. "Most people call it tragic. Maybe most people lack imagination." For the first time, he laughed quietly. It was quick, restrained, but genuine. They talked for another 20 minutes about everything except why they were there. He asked about her work, and she told him she was a freelance designer who made logos and sometimes illustrated children's books. He asked if she liked it. She said it depended on the day and the paycheck. He nodded like he understood too well. When the conversation drifted toward the rain outside, She realized she hadn't looked at her phone once. The awkwardness had dissolved, replaced by something gentler, like the quiet after thunder. When their cups were empty, Harper reached for her coat. "Well, I should go. You should," he said, "but you won't." She frowned, half amused, half offended. "Why not? Because you're curious?" "About what?" "About whether the man in the wheelchair has a story you haven't heard yet." She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. He was right. She was curious, and not out of charity, out of intrigue. Before she could respond, he added, "You don't have to call me again. I know how this works. People feel good about showing up once." Harper looked at him, studying the calm lines of his face, the way he hid behind logic. She said softly, "Maybe you should stop assuming people are just passing through." He looked up at her for a long moment, as if measuring whether to believe her. Rainlight traced the edge of his profile, the soft reflection, glinting off the metal armrest. She picked up her umbrella. "You're impossible," he murmured. She smiled. "And yet you're still talking to me." His lips curved again into that almost smile. "Most people leave," he repeated. "Then I guess I'm not most people," she said again, this time with a steadier voice. She turned toward the door, but before leaving, she heard him call quietly, behind her, "Harper Wright." She nodded. "Thank you for not staying out of pity." She looked back. "I stayed because the coffee's good." Outside, the rain had turned to mist soft enough to blur the city lights. Harper didn't know why her heart felt heavier and lighter all at once. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, she had met someone who looked at her like she was real, not perfect, not performing just there. Inside, Eli watched her leave his reflection, merging with hers in the glass. He whispered almost to himself, "Maybe she's the first one who won't." Harper didn't plan on texting him again, but that night, as the rain turned the Seattle skyline into silver fog, her phone lit up with a message that simply said, "I hope your coffee didn't get cold." She stared at it for a minute before replying. It did, but it was worth it. The typing dots appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. "You looked at me like I was human. That's rare." Harper hesitated, her fingers hovering above the screen. "You spoke like you were trying not to be," she typed back. That was the beginning of something neither of them could name. Harper lived in a one-bedroom apartment on Capitol Hill, stacked with sketchbooks, empty mugs, and half-finished freelance projects. Her life ran on deadlines, caffeine, and the kind of silence that becomes normal when you stop expecting anyone to fill it. After her breakup 2 years ago, she had promised herself never to mix vulnerability with romance again. Love had turned into a project she no longer wanted to manage. Work was safer. Design clients didn't lie or disappear, they just paid late. She spent her days creating clean, perfect logos for startups, while her own life stayed messy and unbranded. Eli lived 3 states away in San Francisco, in a penthouse that looked more like a glass museum than a home. Every corner of his world gleamed with technology. Automated blinds, AI speakers, voice-controlled everything, yet nothing could fix the emptiness that hummed through the walls after the accident. 4 years earlier, he had been driving back from a launch party when another car ran a red light. The impact crushed half the vehicle and severed the nerve line that once let him walk. The news made headlines, not because he was injured, but because he was the visionary CEO, who now had to live with his own invention of mobility devices. He became the story he once told for marketing. His fiancée at the time stayed for the first few months, then left with a note that said, "I loved who you were not, who you've become." Since then, Eli had learned that silence could sound like self-preservation. He rebuilt his company from the chair that replaced his legs, pouring everything into a new line of assistive robotics. The media called it a redemption arc. He called it a way to forget. When he met Harper, he expected another fleeting conversation, another person who would look at him with careful kindness and never return. But her words stayed in his head longer than they should have. Maybe you should stop assuming people are just passing through. That night, he opened one of her design portfolios online and realized she wasn't just talented, she was unfiltered. Her work had rough edges, bold colors, things that looked alive. The next morning, he sent another message. Do you believe art should make people comfortable or make them feel something? They argued about that for hours. She said both. He said that sounded like compromise. She said compromise builds bridges. He said bridges collapse when built on sympathy. She replied that some bridges are worth rebuilding. Their conversations became a nightly ritual, not flirtation, but something raw, the collision of two people who had stopped expecting to be understood. Harper learned he was 33. A former robotics engineer turned CEO of Donovan Mobility Labs. He learned she was 27, had a cat named Pixel, and hated being told she was strong. They talked about work politics, bad movies, childhood dreams that had outgrown them. Sometimes he'd go silent mid-sentence, and she'd imagine him staring at his reflection in the window high above the city lights, wondering what normal used to feel like. One evening he texted, "Do you ever get tired of being self-sufficient?" She replied, "Only when no one notices how hard it is." The next message came slower, then let someone notice. A week later, he invited her to visit his lab. "You can decline," he wrote. "I just think you'd find it interesting." Harper hesitated. Flying to San Francisco to see a man she'd met once sounded insane. But curiosity had a gravity of its own. She booked a ticket. The studio was nothing like she imagined. Sleek white floors, glass walls, robots in various stages of assembly. Eli moved among them with practiced precision, maneuvering his chair between workstations, his hands steady on the controls. He looked more alive here, surrounded by motion and purpose. She stood quietly watching until he noticed. "You came? You asked nicely." He smiled faintly. "That's new." He showed her around, explaining sensors and algorithms in words she could almost understand. When a prototype arm lifted a cup of tea, she laughed. "That's your robot barista." He shrugged. "Kind of. It helps with grip mechanics. It also makes decent tea." He poured 2 cups, one for her, one he placed on the table's edge beside him. For a while they just drank in silence. The air smelled like solder and mint leaves. "So this is your world," she said. "Part of it. The rest is in emails and lawsuits. Sounds glamorous, not really. Success is just a polite word for isolation." She looked at him, searching for irony, but there was none. "You know," she said, "money doesn't buy loneliness out." He smirked. "You sure? Because I've tried." Her laugh broke the tension. "Maybe you just need better investments. Maybe I do." He glanced at her sketchbook lying on the table. "You still draw?" She nodded. "When I'm trying to make sense of things, draw me, then," he said softly. She blinked. "Here now." "Why not? I'd like to see how someone else sees me for once." She hesitated, then opened the book, her pencil moving lightly across the page. 10 minutes later, she turned it around. "You made the machine look kind," he said, almost whispering. "Because its creator isn't cruel," she answered. The words slipped out, honest, unguarded. He stared at her, then laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," she said. Outside, the fog rolled in again, soft and endless. Before she left, he texted, "Next time, bring your sketchbook." "I'll bring honesty." She read it 3 times before replying, "Deal." For the first time in years, both of them went to sleep with the feeling that someone somewhere might understand what it meant to be seen without needing to be saved. Harper arrived at Donovan Mobility Labs again the following Saturday. She told herself it was just curiosity, a chance to see how things worked in a world that didn't belong to her. But when the elevator doors opened and she saw Eli waiting at the end of the hallway, she realized she had been waiting for this all week. He wore a dark navy sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. His sleeves rolled halfway up. The air smelled of coffee metal and electricity, the scent of creation. "You came back," he said simply, as though the fact itself was an unexpected miracle. "You invited me," she replied, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. He led her through the lab, moving easily between workstations. Engineers glanced up briefly, then returned to their monitors clearly, used to seeing their boss glide past like a quiet storm. He paused beside a robot arm mounted on a platform. Its movements were slow, deliberate, almost human. "This is Model H6, he explained. "We're training it to mimic the precision of hand-drawn motion." She leaned closer, fascinated. "So basically it learns by watching." He nodded. "Like people, except it remembers perfectly." He tapped a command on his tablet, and the robot began sketching on paper, a circle, then a line, then a surprisingly elegant outline of a bird. "It draws." Harper's eyes widened. "It learns to," he corrected. "One of my engineers fed it thousands of gesture inputs. It's not art, it's imitation." "Maybe that's how all art starts," she said quietly. Eli looked at her, then the corner of his mouth tilting. "You keep saying things like that. Things that sound simple but stay in your head." She smirked. "Occupational hazard." He turned back to the machine, guiding it with a steady hand on the joystick attached to his chair. The movement was fluid but restrained. She could see the effort behind the grace. "Does it hurt?" she asked without thinking. He blinked, then gave a small laugh. "Only when I think about it." She frowned, not sure if it was a joke or truth. He glanced at her sketchbook hanging from her shoulder. "You said you draw when you're trying to make sense of things. What do you draw when things stop making sense?" "I keep drawing until they do," she said. He nodded slowly, as if memorizing the answer. They spent the rest of the morning in quiet collaboration. She sat beside him, sketching while he coded adjustments to the robot's movement, the hum of machinery filling the space between them like music. Every so often their eyes met, not in a romantic way, but in the way 2 people do when words aren't enough. When lunchtime came, Eli surprised her by saying, "I was going to have lunch delivered. I assume you eat food." "Occasionally," she teased. 15 minutes later, an assistant brought in takeout containers. Thai food still steaming. Harper noticed there was only 1 set of utensils and hesitated. Eli caught her glance and smiled faintly. "Relax. I can handle chopsticks better than most people. Robot hands remember." He demonstrated using a sleek assistive clamp attached to his chair's side to lift a piece of spring roll perfectly. She laughed, genuinely impressed. "That's ridiculous." "That's engineering," he said. "There's a difference." "Barely," she countered, and he grinned. They talked between bites about everything from art school debt to startup investors. Harper found herself laughing more than she had in months. At one point, Eli asked, "Do you ever miss anyone?" She paused, unsure if it was a trick question. Sometimes, she said carefully, but not enough to go looking. "That's the difference between you and me," he murmured. "I miss people who stopped looking for me." For the first time, she had no clever reply. He noticed her silence and changed the subject, but the words stayed. That afternoon, Harper wandered through the glass corridor lined with early prototypes. She stopped at a framed photo of Eli before the accident, standing tall, a champagne glass in hand, surrounded by executives. He looked like a man untouched by gravity. She glanced over her shoulder. He was watching her from a distance. "You can stare," he said. "I barely recognize him myself." "You look different, but not worse," she said softly. "Just heavier." "Gravity," he replied with a humorless smile. "It finds everyone eventually." When she left the lab that day, the rain had stopped. The city glistened under a pale gray sky. Her phone buzzed before she reached the cab. It was him. "You made the machine look kind." She typed back, "Because its creator isn't cruel." There was a pause, then another message. "You should teach me that, how to draw kindness." She stared at the screen, smiling before she typed, "Maybe next Saturday." His reply came almost instantly. "I'll bring tea. Bring honesty, too." The next weekend became the start of a rhythm neither of them planned. She'd arrive with her sketchbook and coffee. He'd meet her at the entrance with that guarded half smile. Together they'd spend hours in the lab, him adjusting algorithms, while she sketched the shapes of motion, the way the robotic joints mirrored human imperfection, the way his hands moved across the controls like someone conducting invisible music. One afternoon, she noticed his attention linger on her drawing longer than usual. "You make it look easy," he said. "It's not," she replied. "Neither is this." He gestured to his chair, to the code, to the weight of everything he carried. "But it looks effortless," she said. He gave a quiet laugh. "That's the illusion of control. You learn to fake it until the world stops asking questions. Does it ever stop? Not really." She looked down at her sketch. "Maybe that's what makes us alike," she said. "People think we're fine because we make it look fine." He didn't answer, but something in his expression softened. At the end of the day, as she packed her things, he said, "Harper." She looked up. "Yeah, if you ever get tired of pretending you can be here, you don't have to say anything." The simplicity of it hit her harder than any confession. She nodded, unable to speak. When she reached the elevator, she heard him call after her, "Most people don't come back." "Then I guess I'm still not most people," she said, echoing their first meeting. This time he smiled fully, not the polite kind, but something real unguarded. As the doors closed, Harper caught her reflection next to his two worlds divided by glass, yet sharing the same light. Neither of them noticed how the reflection lingered after they were gone. The following Saturday, the sky over San Francisco was bruised with low clouds when Harper arrived at the penthouse. Eli had suggested they work there instead of the lab, saying he wanted to test how the lighting system affected color recognition. She didn't argue. She wanted to see where he lived, what kind of world existed beyond his polished professional armor. When the elevator opened into his apartment, she stopped short. The place was impossibly clean, almost sterile. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like moving paintings, and everything gleamed in silver and glass. It didn't feel lived in, it felt curated. Eli was by the window laptop, balanced on a sleek carbon table, a faint blue glow reflecting off his face. "You found it," he said without turning. "Hard to miss." she replied, stepping closer. You live in a magazine. Or a museum, he said dryly. Depends on who's visiting. She smiled faintly. So which am I? He finally looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened. You're the exception. She tried to hide the small rush that sentence caused. He gestured toward the corner. There's coffee. Machine's smarter than me, so don't judge. She poured a cup and wandered, noticing how little of him was in the space. No photos, no clutter, no traces of warmth, just precision. You know, she said finally, this place looks like someone built it to prove they're fine. He glanced at her sharply, then laughed under his breath. You analyze rooms now. Only when they scream for help, she said, sipping. He didn't answer, and the silence stretched until she turned to find him watching her carefully. What she asked, you remind me of someone who used to challenge everything I said. Did you hate her? No, he said after a pause. She left. She set the cup down gently. I read about her. His jaw tightened. Of course you did. It wasn't on purpose. Your name still comes up when you Google billionaire wheelchair CEO. The article said she couldn't handle it. He finished flatly. That's the polite version. The real one is she didn't want a husband who reminded her of failure every day. That's not your failure, Harper said. Tell that to the mirror. She stepped closer. You still love her. His eyes flicked toward the window, where rain had started to streak the glass. No, he said quietly. I just never unlearned the way she left. The honesty in his voice cut deeper than any confession. Harper felt something ache in her chest, a strange empathy that had nothing to do with pity. You know, she said softly, my mom used a wheelchair for almost a year after her stroke. She hated every second of it. Eli looked at her, then curiosity flickering. She got better mostly. Walks slower now, but she's fine. I remember people staring at us in the grocery store like she was contagious. I used to smile back at them. Why? Because it made them uncomfortable, she said with a half smile. Sometimes that's the only way to remind people you exist. He studied her face for a long moment. You learned that young. You learn fast when life stops asking for permission, so you understand. He said slowly what it's like when the room goes quiet before you even speak. I do, she said, and it's why I didn't leave the cafe that day. His eyes darkened, something unspoken, flickering behind them. You thought you'd save me. No, she said firmly. I just didn't want to be another person who pretended not to see. That made him laugh soft and bitter. You really think seeing someone helps? Sometimes it's all they need, she said, to be seen like they're still human. He turned away, wheeling toward a console by the wall. You talk like a therapist. I talk like someone who listens, she replied. He stopped his reflection, mirrored in the glass beside hers. And what do you hear? A man who keeps building walls and calling them homes, she said quietly. He froze, then gave a wry smile. That's poetic. Did you rehearse it? No, she said. It just sounded true. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The rain softened, tapping the windows like faint applause. When he turned again, his voice was lower. You don't understand how exhausting it is to be the lesson in other people's stories. I'm either inspiration porn or tragedy porn. No one ever asks if I'm just tired. So are you, she asked gently. Tired always, he said, but I can't stop. If I stop, everything I built collapses. The company, the foundation, the illusion that I still matter. You matter, she said. He gave a half laugh. That's easy for you to say. You still get to walk away when it's too much. She didn't flinch, and you still get to push forward when no one believes you can. So maybe we both have something the other envies. He looked at her again, slower this time, as if her presence was something he was starting to understand. Maybe he said, "But envy doesn't fix anything." "No," she said, "but it keeps us honest." She reached for her bag and pulled out a sketch. It was a rough pencil drawing of him from the lab seated by the robot arm, the city reflected in the glass behind him. She handed it to him. "Here." He stared at it for a long time, tracing the lines with his eyes. "You made me look alive," she offered. "Present," he said, "like I belong in the picture." "Because you do." He swallowed hard, setting the drawing on the table. "You shouldn't waste your talent on people like me." "People like what like me?" he repeated. "Broken things are bad investments." "You're not broken," she said firmly. "You're just different." "Different is just a polite synonym for inconvenient," he said. "Not to me." The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. Something softer lived there now, something fragile but real. He finally spoke. "Do you believe people can start over?" "Only if they stop pretending they don't need to." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. "You have a way of making even pain sound reasonable." "That's called surviving," she said. He gave a small smile. "Then you must be an expert." "A reluctant one," she said, smiling back. The clouds outside began to break a sliver of sunlight cutting across the floor. Harper turned toward the window. "You ever notice light finds cracks first?" "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean," she said, "maybe being cracked isn't the worst thing. Maybe it's the only way light gets in." He didn't reply, but his eyes followed the path of sunlight until it reached the edge of her shoe. When she left that day, she glanced back once. He was still by the window, holding her drawing, the paper, catching the light like a fragile mirror. And for the first time since the accident, Eli Donovan didn't feel like a man defined by what he'd lost, but by the strange, quiet presence of someone who had simply refused to look away. Saturdays became their unspoken ritual. No plans, no labels, just the quiet agreement that they would meet again. Harper brought her sketchbook and sometimes a bag of scones from the bakery on Pine Street, still warm and buttery. Eli always had tea, waiting steeped exactly 4 minutes, because he claimed patience made the flavor honest. Their conversations stretched beyond work and pain. They talked about everything: the smell of wood after rain, the architecture of trust, the way time slows when you stop checking the clock. She teased him about his robotic efficiency, and he countered that her chaos was mathematically impossible. It became their language. In the lab they found rhythm. Harper sketched as Eli coded their silence a comfortable hum of creative focus. The robotic arm, the same model she had seen before, was now capable of mimicking subtle human gestures. He guided it through a series of fine movements, his concentration absolute. She watched, mesmerized by the quiet precision of his hands. When he paused, she said softly, "You make it look easy." He glanced up. "It's not. Neither is drawing people who hide behind walls. So why do it? Because sometimes the act of looking is its own kind of truth." That made him smile. "You're a strange kind of philosopher, Harper." "Occupational hazard," she replied again, and he laughed. One afternoon she arrived early and found him at the piano tucked in the corner of the penthouse. His fingers moved across the keys with measured slowness. The melody wasn't perfect. It faltered, uncertain, but it was heartbreakingly sincere. She leaned against the doorframe, letting him finish. "You play?" she asked. "When I forget I can't run anymore," he said without looking up. She walked closer. That's beautiful and depressing at the same time. Most honest things are he said. What about you? What do you do when you forget? I draw until remembering feels easier. They shared a glance that lingered too long heavy with things neither was ready to name. That night, as she packed her things, he said, "You've been coming here every weekend. Doesn't your life in Seattle miss you?" "Maybe," she said, "but it's quieter here, quieter or easier. Maybe both." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I used to think silence meant loneliness. With you, it just feels quiet." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "That's progress." He nodded, as though that word meant more than he could say. Over the next weeks, their bond deepened in small, invisible ways. She noticed the way he closed his eyes when he laughed, how he traced his thumb along the edge of his cup when he was thinking. He noticed how she hummed when she drew, how her brow furrowed when she lost focus. They began finishing each other's thoughts without realizing. He told her about his company's first prototype, how he had designed it for a friend who lost his leg in Afghanistan. "That was the first time I understood purpose," he said. "And the last time before the accident that I felt alive. Maybe purpose doesn't disappear," she said. "It just waits for the right witness." He looked at her and said, "And what if you're that witness? Then I guess you owe me royalties." He laughed quietly, but something in his eyes softened, as if he was trying to remember how to let joy in. Late one evening, as rain painted streaks down the glass, Harper stayed longer than usual. The city glowed below neon reflecting off the wet streets. Eli worked on his computer while she sketched the skyline. When she stretched to put her pencil away, her sleeve brushed his arm. It was an innocent touch light as breath, but it made him freeze. She pulled back immediately. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be," he murmured. "It's just been a while since anyone—" He didn't finish. She met his gaze. "You don't have to explain." "No," he said softly. "But I want to." He turned slightly, his voice lower now. "After the accident, even the idea of touch felt complicated. People were afraid. I was afraid. It became easier to exist without it. And now it doesn't feel impossible anymore." She hesitated, then smiled. "That's good news." He nodded. "It's strange, though. You think you forget what it feels like, but you don't. The body remembers before the mind does." She reached across the table, touching his wrist gently. Then maybe the memory's just waiting for permission. He exhaled slowly, eyes meeting hers. For a long moment, neither moved. The rain outside grew heavier, a percussion against glass, filling the silence between them with rhythm. When she finally left that night, she stood by the door and said, "You know, I think I like this version of you." "Which one is that? The one who's still learning?" His lips curved. "Then I'll keep studying." "Good," she said, "because I'm a terrible teacher." He chuckled quietly, the sound chasing after her as she stepped into the hallway. Over the next month, the Saturdays became their sanctuary. They built a pattern made of small rituals, morning tea, soft jazz, long silences, and laughter that belonged only to them. Eli would show her blueprints of new devices, and she'd draw her interpretations of the machines with faces' arms that seemed to reach for sunlight. "You keep giving my inventions souls," he teased one day. "Maybe they already have them," she replied. "Maybe you just forgot to look." The bond between them grew in ways that defied language. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, not yet, but it was intimate, a merging of solitude. They became each other's safe silence. Sometimes when she packed her bag to leave, he'd ask next Saturday, and she'd smile. "Where else would I be?" One evening she arrived to find him waiting by the window, dressed differently. White shirt, open collar, no jacket. His hair was tousled. His eyes tired but warm. "You okay?" she asked. "Long day," he said. "Investors, meetings, expectations, the usual. And you still chose to spend the evening coding." "No," he said. "I chose to spend it not alone." The honesty of it hit her like a wave. She set her bag down her throat, tightening. "Then I guess I made the right choice too." They shared dinner that night, simple food, comfortable conversation. Afterward, she helped him put away the dishes. When his sleeve got caught on the edge of the counter, she stepped closer to untangle it. Their faces were only inches apart. Neither spoke. She could smell the faint trace of cedar and metal polish. His eyes were steady, vulnerable in a way that disarmed her. "Harper," he whispered, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "Yeah," she breathed. "Thank you. For what? For showing up?" She smiled. "You keep saying that like it's not a choice." "It isn't," he said. "Not anymore." The air between them stilled thick with something unspoken but undeniable. She didn't move. He didn't either. Then, as if some unspoken agreement passed between them, she reached out and straightened his collar. Her fingers brushed the skin of his neck, warm and human. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. A moment of quiet truth. When she stepped back, he smiled faintly. "Touch of acceptance," he murmured. What nothing, he said, just thinking out loud. She laughed softly. "Try not to overthink it." Too late. Later, when she left, the city lights followed her reflection in the elevator glass. Behind her, Eli sat by the window, watching the rain streaks blur into light. For the first time in 4 years, he felt something stir a pulse that had nothing to do with robotics or success. It was life raw and simple, a reminder that even broken circuits can find connection when someone decides to stay. The invitation arrived in an embossed envelope sealed with the Donovan Mobility Labs insignia. Harper turned it over twice before opening it. Inside was a card printed on heavy paper, "Annual Benefit Gala for Assistive Innovation," hosted by Eli Donovan. Black tie, Saturday 11:00 p.m. Beneath it, in his neat handwriting, were 3 words, "You should come." Harper stared at it for a long minute, unsure whether it was an invitation or a test. They had spent months in a rhythm of quiet, Saturday's art and tea, and wordless understanding. The thought of stepping into his public world, the world that once devoured him, felt like walking into a storm in glass slippers. Still, she texted back, "Is that a request or an order?" He replied, "A risk." She sighed, smiled, and started looking for a dress. The night of the gala, the city glittered like it was pretending not to be broken. The venue sat at the edge of the bay, all glass walls and chandeliers reflecting the water. Harper arrived in a simple navy gown, her hair swept back the way her mother used to do for church. Eli waited near the entrance, wearing a tailored black suit, his chair gleaming under the lights. When he saw her, his face softened. "You clean up well," she teased. He smiled. "You look like trouble." She grinned. "Guess we're even then." They entered together, moving through the crowd of donors and executives who turned like planets drawn to his orbit. Harper felt every pair of eyes trailing them, some curious, some polite, some openly judging. To them, she wasn't his date. She was context, a visual reminder of his difference. The whispers followed. "Is that his assistant?" "She's pretty brave to come. Poor guy must be lonely." She kept her head high, her arm lightly brushing the edge of his chair like an anchor. When a photographer approached asking for a picture, Eli hesitated. She leaned in and said softly, "Smile like they can't hurt you." He did, and for a moment, the flash caught something real. Not the billionaire or the survivor, but two people choosing not to hide. Dinner was served under a canopy of soft golden light. The clinking of glasses filled the room. Harper sat beside him, while servers floated between tables. A young waiter stopped by, setting down Eli's plate. Then, in a hushed, uncertain voice, he said, "Do you need help with your date, sir?" The words landed like a slap. For a second, the table went silent. Eli's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Harper's voice cut clean through the hum of conversation. "No," she said calmly, "but you might need help learning manners." The waiter froze color, draining from his face. "I am so sorry, miss, I didn't." She smiled not sweetly, but sharply. "It's okay." Happens when people mistake decency for charity. Around them, a few guests exchanged uneasy glances, pretending to return to their meals. Eli stared at her, his eyes unreadable. The waiter muttered another apology and fled. Harper picked up her fork again, as though nothing had happened. "What was that?" he asked finally, his tone halfway, between shock and amusement. "Self-defense," she said. He shook his head, almost laughing. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't," she said. "I wanted to." For the first time that night, the tension in his shoulders eased, replaced by something almost tender. As the evening went on, he introduced her to colleagues, investors, and board members. Some smiled genuinely, others looked through her. She noticed how often they directed questions to him without acknowledging her presence, and how often he redirected them anyway, saying things like, "You should ask Harper, she has a better eye for design." It was subtle, but she saw the shift, the way his voice carried, not apology, but pride. Later, when speeches began, he excused himself from the stage to present a new prototype, a lightweight exoskeleton designed to help children with muscular disorders walk again. Harper watched from her seat as he spoke into the microphone. Steady composed his words, wrapping the room in quiet conviction. He didn't mention his accident or his past or pity. He spoke only of possibility. When the audience rose in applause, she realized her hands were shaking. She had never seen anyone so exposed and yet so in control of his own narrative. When he returned, she leaned down and whispered, "You were incredible." He glanced up, eyes glinting under the lights. "You think so, I know," so she said. After the program, guests mingled around the ballroom. A woman in diamonds leaned over to Harper, her smile practiced. "You must be very proud to work for Mr. Donovan." Harper blinked, then smiled politely. "I don't work for him." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Oh, I assumed you assumed wrong," she said simply. The woman stammered an apology, then drifted away. Eli caught the exchange from a few feet away and gave her a look that was half gratitude, half disbelief. "You really don't let people breathe, do you?" he murmured. "Only when they stop suffocating others," she replied. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "You're impossible. And yet here you are," she said. As the night wound down, a soft jazz band played near the balcony. The bay shimmered beyond the glass, and Harper felt the fatigue of pretending settle in her bones. She leaned closer to Eli. "Fresh air?" he asked, already knowing. She nodded. Outside, the cool wind carried salt and sound. The city lights painted the waves in fractured gold. He maneuvered his chair beside her, resting his hands loosely on the controls. For a while, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You shouldn't have to defend me in there." She turned to face him. "I didn't do it for you." He frowned. "Then why?" Because people like that waiter think compassion gives them permission to condescend. I wasn't defending you, Eli. I was defending respect. He studied her face, the curve of her jaw, lit by the bay lights. You know, she said softly, I thought tonight would make me feel small. It didn't. It made the room look smaller. That's new for me. He smiled the kind of smile that reached his eyes. You're not like anyone I've ever met. Good, she said. Then you can't compare me to the ones who left. He went quiet at that, the memory flashing like a distant echo. After a long pause, he said, When people left before, I used to wonder what I did wrong. Tonight, I realized maybe I just had the wrong audience. She touched his hand gently. Or maybe you just needed the right company. He looked at their hands, hers small, and paint stained his marked with faint scars. The touch wasn't romantic, but it was real. Inside the band changed songs, a slow melodic tune drifting through the open doors. For a heartbeat, she thought about asking him to dance, but the thought felt cliché, almost cruel. Instead, she said, If you could dance again, would you? He smiled faintly. Who says I stopped? She watched as he reached for the joystick on his chair, adjusting it slightly, then moved forward an inch. Slow, deliberate. She understood then what he meant. Movement was relative. Freedom was perspective. She stepped beside him, matching pace, her dress brushing the floor like a whisper. They circled the balcony, once the city, stretching endlessly before them. When they stopped, he looked up at her and said softly, Thank you for seeing me, Harper. She swallowed hard. Don't thank me for something you earned. He smiled the quiet kind that said more than words could. Later, as they left the gala, paparazzi, lights flared outside. Cameras flashed, shouts filled the air. Harper instinctively stepped between him and the crowd shielding him, though she knew it was useless. The questions came fast. Is this your new girlfriend, Eli? Are you dating your caregiver? How long have you been seeing each other? He raised a hand to deflect the glare, but Harper spoke first. She's not my caregiver, he said firmly. His voice calm but steady. But the noise drowned him out. The flashes kept coming until she leaned down close and whispered, Let's go. He nodded. Inside the car, silence fell. The world outside blurred into streaks of light. She finally said quietly, You handled that better than I would have. He smiled faintly. Years of practice. Still she could see the shadow in his eyes, the wound reopening behind the composure. She wanted to reach for his hand, but stopped herself. Instead, she said softly, For what it's worth, you didn't need me to defend you tonight. You did that yourself. He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to stay either. She met his gaze. I didn't. I wanted to. For the first time since the accident, Eli Donovan let himself believe that maybe love wasn't about saving or being saved. Maybe it was just about standing or sitting beside someone long enough for the noise to fade and the truth to stay. The morning after the gala, Harper's phone exploded with notifications before she even opened her eyes. Her art clients tagging her name on gossip sites, her inbox flooding with messages titled, Is this you and care to explain? She sat up, heart pounding, as she saw the headline across multiple platforms. Young designer dating disabled billionaire for fame. The thumbnail was brutal, her laughing at the table, his hand resting near hers. The caption read, Pity turned profitable. Her throat went dry. She scrolled through the comments, vicious, casual, endless. Of course she's with him for money. He probably pays her to smile like that. She's the new Florence Nightingale of Silicon Valley. By the time she reached the bottom, her chest ached. She didn't call Eli. She didn't know what to say. Within hours, her inbox of client contracts began collapsing emails citing brand sensitivity and image alignment. In one message, a company simply wrote, "We admire your courage, but can't proceed." By evening, she sat in her small Seattle apartment, surrounded by silence and digital ruin. Eli saw the storm unfold from his office. His PR team rushed in, with updates, damage reports, requests for statements. His assistant stammered, "Sir, this could escalate fast. Do we deny the relationship?" Eli's voice was calm but cold. "Why would I deny it?" "Because the narrative isn't in your favor," the man said, lowering his tone. "They're calling it a publicity stunt. Some outlets think she's your caregiver turned companion." Eli turned away from the screens, jaw tight. "Find out who leaked it." "It's probably the restaurant staff, sir. TMZ paid someone for photos." Eli exhaled sharply. "Then we take control." He wheeled toward the glass wall San Francisco, glowing beneath him, and said quietly, "Schedule a press conference." His assistant blinked. "Sir, you heard me. I'm done letting people speak for me." 2 days later, the media frenzy peaked. Harper avoided calls, muted her phone, and hid inside her apartment. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, she ignored it until the knock came again, steady and deliberate. She opened the door to find Eli there, hair slightly disheveled, exhaustion darkening his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said immediately. "Neither should your name be trending," he replied. She glanced away. "They're tearing me apart." "Then let me help," he said. "I'm holding a press conference tomorrow. I'll tell them the truth." "What truth?" she asked bitterly. "That I was dumb enough to think people could see past a wheelchair and a headline that you're not what they say you are." "You think that matters," she snapped. "Once the internet decides who you are, that's it." He looked at her silently, pain flickering beneath his restraint. "Then we change the story." "No," she said. "You don't get to save me." "Harper?" "I mean it." Her voice cracked. "You've already lived through being someone's pity project. I won't be yours." The words hit harder than she expected. He flinched like she'd struck him. The silence between them stretched. Then he said softly, "You think that's what this is, pity?" She bit her lip but didn't answer. "I don't pity you," he said. "I admire you. You're the only person who didn't look away." "And look what that cost," she whispered. "My work, my reputation, everything I built." "Then let me give something back." "No, Eli." Her voice steadied. "You can't buy integrity, not mine." For a moment they stood there, the distance between them heavier than space. Then she stepped back. "You should go." He hesitated, searching her face. "Is this you ending it? It's me protecting what's left. From me, from everyone." He nodded slowly, eyes hollowing. "Most people leave," he said quietly. "Guess I'm not most people," she tried to say, but the words didn't come this time. When the door closed, he remained on the other side for a few seconds before turning away. The next morning, the press gathered in front of the Donovan headquarters. Microphones, cameras, the swarm. Eli appeared at the podium, posture, straight face unreadable. The headline screamed, "Billionaire breaks silence on relationship scandal." The crowd hushed as he began to speak. "I've been told to deny, to deflect, to protect my company's image," he said evenly. "But what I won't do is apologize for being human. Harper Lynn is not my caretaker, my charity, or my PR distraction. She's the reason I get out of bed every morning and remember what life feels like." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed. "If you want to talk about strength," he continued, "talk about hers. If you want a story, Here's one she didn't stay out of pity. She stayed because she saw a person, not a chair. The video went viral within minutes. Some praised him, others mocked. The backlash split the internet in half. But Harper didn't watch it live. She was already gone. Back in her apartment, she packed her sketchbooks and a few clothes into a duffel bag. Her rent was due. Her reputation was bleeding. She couldn't breathe in the city anymore. So she left. No goodbye, no note. She took a late train north the landscape, blurring into rain-smeared streaks. She thought of Eli's face when she shut the door, the quiet resignation, the way he didn't fight it. It was easier to disappear before she broke any more of his world. Meanwhile, Eli sat alone in his penthouse that night, the city glowing below like static. His PR team kept calling, but he ignored them. He stared at the photo on the news, their smiles frozen twisted into scandal, and felt the strange ache of absence settling in his chest. His phone vibrated once, an email notification. It was from Harper's work address. He opened it. Only one line inside. "You don't need to save me." He closed the laptop, leaning back. The hum of the city filled the silence. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to build next. Not a machine, not a defense, just meaning. He thought of the word she'd given him that first day, quiet. Without her even, quiet hurt. Days blurred into weeks. Interviews came and went. The company's stock dipped and recovered. The headlines moved onto newer scandals. But Eli didn't. He stopped attending board meetings. He stopped answering calls. His assistants whispered outside the office doors, wondering if he'd lost his edge. In truth, he had lost something far more dangerous: hope, disguised as routine. One night, he wheeled toward the window, city lights flickering like dying stars, and whispered to no one. She didn't leave out of pity either. He poured himself tea out of habit, but it went cold before he touched it. He thought of calling her, then remembered the last look in her eyes, not anger, just fatigue. Maybe that was what broke him most. Not rejection, but exhaustion. She had carried enough battles for both of them. Somewhere in a small town 2 states away, Harper rented a single room above an old bookstore. She drew by the window every morning, the smell of ink and rain becoming her anchor. Sometimes she'd catch herself sketching the outline of a wheelchair or the curve of a teacup and tear the page out. But no matter how many times she started over, his face found its way back. She didn't send the drawings anywhere. They weren't meant to be seen. They were confessions written in graphite. Back in San Francisco, Eli stared at the sketches she'd left behind. He'd kept one, the one she gave him of the lab, his reflection in the glass. He placed it by his desk, framed, so he couldn't forget what honesty looked like. Then one morning, after weeks of silence, he turned on his computer and opened a new project folder labeled H-Arm Redevelopment, a new purpose born from absence. But before coding the first line, he whispered the words that had never left him. "You didn't have to stay. You wanted to." It wasn't a plea anymore. It was memory. The city never stopped moving, but inside Eli's penthouse time stood still. The soft hum of machines, the ticking of the automated blinds, the quiet chime of the elevator, it all played like a lullaby to absence. Harper's cup still sat on the counter, a faint ring of tea at the bottom untouched for weeks. Eli noticed it every morning but never washed it. It was the only proof she had been real. Work became his disguise again. He filled his days with meetings, testing prototypes, overseeing projects. But even his team sensed the shift. The man who once demanded precision now settled for silence. "You okay, boss?" one of his engineers asked. Eli nodded without looking up. "I'm fine." It was the most convincing lie he'd ever told. Every night he returned to the same apartment that smelled faintly of jasmine and paper. He would open her sketchbook, the one she forgot on the couch, and trace his finger over the faint pencil lines. Her last unfinished drawing wasn't of a person or a machine. It was light, rays spilling across a surface that had no form. On the corner she'd written, "You build things that move. I draw the things that make them worth moving toward." The simplicity of it undid him. He poured himself tea, but it cooled untouched again and again, until one evening he stopped pretending. Harper's absence was not loud. It didn't roar. It hummed like a constant low note just under his heartbeat. He went to work and returned home, the loop tightening like a coil. The world saw him as a genius again, a man who turned tragedy into progress. But alone, he was just a man replaying every word she'd said, every silence she left behind. Across states, Harper lived in a small attic above an old bookstore in Bellingham. The rent was cheap, the air smelled of old paper, and the owner let her paint by the window as long as she helped restock shelves. She didn't own a TV anymore. The internet had become a battlefield she refused to revisit. Her days were quiet draw, eat, sleep, repeat. She thought peace would feel cleaner, lighter. Instead, it felt like holding her breath underwater. Sometimes, when the shop was empty, she would glance at the empty stool across from her and imagine Eli there half smiling, telling her some absurd fact about microprocessors or tea oxidation levels. She'd shake her head to dispel it, but the ache lingered. The silence he left behind was alive. One afternoon, she went to the park by the harbor. The air was crisp, the trees gold with fall. She opened her sketchbook and began drawing a hand, steady, angular, strong. She stopped midway, realizing it wasn't just any hand, it was his. The memory of the first time she'd touched it hit her, the weight of skin against skin, the warmth of trust that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with recognition. She closed the book and wiped her eyes. "Don't do this," she whispered to herself. But grief doesn't listen to reason. It paints anyway. Meanwhile, Eli had stopped sleeping through the night. The doctors called it post-traumatic insomnia, but this was different. It wasn't the accident haunting him, it was her voice, her silence. The way she used to fill a room without saying a word. He began designing at 3 a.m. when the city was quiet enough to hear his own regret. His new prototype wasn't for profit, it wasn't for investors, it was for her. He named it the H-Arm Project. H for Harper, though he never told anyone. This arm wasn't just mechanical, it could hold a pencil, respond to muscle memory, mimic the subtle movement of an artist's hand. It was his way of giving her back what the world took. As he programmed the first movement sequence, he whispered, "You taught me to draw again, just not with hands." Months passed, seasons changed. Harper sold 2 small paintings at a local art fair, both signed anonymously. When the buyer asked about the inspiration, she said a man who builds light from metal. The buyer smiled, not understanding. That night, back in her attic, she received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a small blueprint, folded carefully, an arm, sketched with precision, and signed ED beneath it in familiar handwriting were 5 words, "The tea got cold again." She sat frozen, staring at it. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a plea, it was presence. Proof that he hadn't moved on from their silence either. She pressed the paper to her chest and whispered, "Idiot." Eli continued refining the design, making the robotic arm capable of tracing fluid lines on paper. One evening, when it finally moved as intended, he attached a graphite pencil and set it down. The machine began to draw slow, deliberate strokes that formed the faint outline of a teacup, then a woman's hand holding it. He stared as the lines emerged, realizing it was drawing her memory, not his command. His breath hitched. He took the paper when it stopped and read what he had coded into its final gesture, a written phrase signed by the arm itself. "If you ever come back, I'll draw with you, not for you." Harper found herself back on a train a week later, the blueprint still folded in her bag. She told herself it was just to see the city again, to visit the art exhibit downtown that was showcasing work about rehabilitation and technology. But deep down, she knew why she was going. The silence had stretched long enough. She couldn't live with the unfinished sentence between them. At the exhibit, a piece at the center caught her attention, a robotic arm mounted on a pedestal, moving slowly across a canvas. It was drawing the faint silhouette of a sunrise, one careful stroke at a time. The plaque read, "Donovan Mobility, the H-arm for artists who never stopped dreaming." Her chest tightened. The crowd whispered admiration, but she barely heard them. She stepped closer until she could see the artist's signature at the bottom of the piece. ED. It wasn't a company signature. It was personal. The machine paused mid-draw, as if sensing her. The graphite hovered above the canvas, trembling slightly, then resumed its motion, finishing a single word beneath the image light. She covered her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. "You built sunlight," she whispered. That night she returned to the city skyline, standing outside the Donovan Labs building, the same one she'd sworn never to approach again. She looked up at the top floor where the lights were still on. She hesitated only a moment before walking inside. The receptionist looked up in surprise but said nothing. She pressed the elevator button, heart pounding. When the doors opened, the silence inside was the same as before. Soft, sterile, filled with the hum of machines. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. Eli sat by his desk, the robot arm still beside him, a pencil clutched delicately between its fingers. He didn't hear the door at first. When he finally turned, he froze. Harper stood there soaked from the rain, clutching her sketchbook. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence that had once separated them now carried every word they'd left unsaid. Then Eli whispered, voice raw, "You came back." Harper smiled faintly, tears glinting in her eyes, not out of pity. He exhaled a sound somewhere between relief and surrender. The machine's light flickered beside them like a pulse. She stepped closer and touched his hand. It was warm, trembling slightly. "I missed the tea," she said softly. He smiled through the ache. "I kept it waiting." The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the things they didn't need, to say of everything they finally understood. The next morning, the city felt different, lighter, as if something invisible had finally lifted. Harper woke on Eli's couch, wrapped in a soft gray blanket, the same one she had once used to dry her hands after spilling tea months ago. The smell of bergamot filled the air. For a moment she thought it was a dream, until she heard the faint sound of wheels on hardwood. "You're awake." Eli said, his voice quiet but warm. He wore a soft white sweater, his hair still damp from a morning shower. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, painting golden lines across his face. She sat up, blinking against it. "You still make the tea too strong," she murmured. He smiled. Some habits survive. She looked at him for a long moment, memorizing the steadiness in his expression, the absence of bitterness. So do people, she said. Sometimes he replied. There was no drama, no apologies, just peace shaped like understanding. He led her to the studio where the robot arm waited on its pedestal. The graphite tip gleamed faintly in the morning light. She noticed new details, the delicate sensors along its joints, the faint whirring hum of the circuits that mimicked human rhythm. "You finished it?" she said. "It finished itself," he replied. "I just followed what it wanted to become." "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours," he said simply. She turned to him, startled. "Eli, I built it for you. Or maybe because of you. I can't tell the difference anymore." Her throat tightened. "I don't deserve that." "Then maybe I don't either," he said. "But deserving isn't the point. It's about what we build from what's left." He handed her a stylus attached to the H-arm and said, "Try it." Her hand hesitated. He nodded encouragingly. Slowly, she guided the arm to move across a sheet of paper. The graphite met surface. The lines were uneven at first, then steadied. Together they drew the outline of a sunrise. Halfway through the motion, Eli reached for the control pad, syncing his chair's movement to the arm's rhythm. The device adjusted its angle, almost dancing with her. Their movements blended human and machine, mechanical precision and fragile emotion merging into one fluent motion. When they stopped, she looked at him, tears filling her eyes. "You built sunlight," she whispered, echoing what she had said in the gallery. He looked up at her eyes, glowing with quiet pride. "You taught me where to aim." Later they sat by the window, sharing tea, the city humming faintly below. "When I left, I thought I was protecting you," she said. "From what? From the noise, the headlines, the pity. But I see now that leaving just gave them power." And now he asked, "Now I don't care who's watching." She smiled faintly. "People stare less when you smile back, remember? You said that once," he murmured. "And you said maybe they stare because they forgot how to see." She reached over, touching his hand gently. "So show them again." They spent the afternoon rebuilding what silence had paused. He introduced her to his new research team, artists, engineers, and therapists, all working together on integrating assistive technology with creative expression. Harper watched as people with prosthetics painted using sensors and robotic extensions guided by his software. The room pulsed with laughter, concentration, and a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in months. When a young woman approached her, holding a digital stylus, and said, "He told me you helped design the inspiration sketch," Harper felt her throat close. "I didn't design it," she said softly. "I just reminded him why it mattered." After the demonstrations, they returned to the penthouse. The air felt different now, alive again. Harper wandered to the balcony where the sun was setting across the bay, turning the water into liquid gold. Eli joined her, his chair rolling quietly beside her. For a while they just watched the horizon. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but only to realize I prefer what is." She smiled. "You and your poetic logic, you and your impossible faith," he said. She laughed quietly. "We're a strange pair." "Perfectly mismatched," he corrected. She turned to face him, the wind playing with her hair. "Eli, can I ask something?" "Anything. That night after the gala when you defended me. Why did you say it that way? She's the reason I get out of bed." He met her gaze. "Because it was true. For years I thought I was living out of obligation. To the company, to the idea of recovery. But you reminded me that living isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about creating something that still matters despite it. She blinked back tears. You always make the complicated sound simple. You make the simple feel extraordinary, he said. That's harder. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was alive. A conversation without words. She stepped closer and touched his cheek. He didn't move away. Not out of pity, he asked quietly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Never, she said, out of choice. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie moment. It was soft, hesitant, and full of the kind of quiet that holds everything that was once unsaid. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't pull back. When they finally parted, he whispered, "You sure you're not here because you feel sorry for me?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "I'm here because you stopped feeling sorry for yourself." He let out a small laugh, shaky and sincere. "Then I guess we're both learning." That evening they worked together again, him coding adjustments for the H-arm, her sketching new designs for ergonomic tools. It was peaceful like breathing after holding it too long. The machine on the desk began drawing automatically, guided by her recent input. The image formed slowly, a pair of hands touching one human one, mechanical, joined by a thread of light. They both watched in silence until Eli said, "Looks familiar." "Maybe it's us," she said softly. "Maybe it's what happens when broken things find harmony." He reached for her hand and said, "Then I'm glad we broke." She laughed through her tears. "You're such an engineer. You're such an artist. So what does that make us?" "Something whole," he said simply. Outside, the storm clouds drifted away, leaving a streak of pale moonlight over the bay. The penthouse glowed warm and alive again, the hum of technology blending with the quiet rhythm of two people, rediscovering what it means to stay. Harper looked around at the sketches, the prototypes, the teacups on the table, and whispered, "This place finally feels like home." Eli nodded. "Not because of walls," he said, "because you came back." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder and closed her eyes. "Then maybe I never left," she said. He smiled the kind of smile that comes from healing, not happiness. The night stretched on, filled with the soft sounds of creation, the scratch of graphite, the click of keys, the sigh of wind through glass. For the first time in years, Eli didn't fear the silence. He welcomed it, because now it wasn't empty. It was shared. It was love that stayed. 1 year later, the morning light poured into a studio that smelled of inkwood and jasmine. The sign outside read, "The Sunlight Studio by Donovan and Lynn." Inside, the space, art, and technology lived side by side, robotic arms guided by sensors. Painting beside children with prosthetics engineers. Laughing with artists, music humming through every corner. Harper stood by the large window, sketching as usual, her hair loosely tied, her hands stained with graphite. Across the room, Eli adjusted one of the prototype arms, fine-tuning its balance. His movements were steady, his expression calm. When he caught her watching him, he smiled that quiet, half-smile she had memorized. "What he asked, just making sure the genius still works," she said. "Only because the artist keeps showing up," he replied. She walked over, handing him a cup of tea the way she did every morning. Still 4 minutes always. They shared a glance that said more than 1,000 words. There were no declarations, no dramatics, just peace, the kind that only comes after surviving together. Around them, life moved softly. A teenager with an artificial arm painted bold red strokes on a canvas. An elderly woman used a stylus connected to one of Eli's devices to write her first letter, since arthritis took her hand. Harper knelt beside a young boy, showing him how to guide the pencil with his robotic brace. See, the line doesn't have to be perfect, she said. It just has to keep going. The boy looked up and smiled. Like people, she grinned. Exactly. Eli watched from across the room, his heart catching in the quiet pride that filled the space. He rolled closer and said softly, "You built something beautiful." "We built it," she corrected. "I just followed your blueprints." "No," he said, his voice lower. "You gave them color." At noon they took a break, sitting by the window with their tea. The city outside shimmered beneath spring sunlight. "Do you ever miss the old world?" Harper asked. "The one with galas and headlines and noise." "Not even a little," he said. "Back then I thought achievement would keep me alive. Turns out it was connection." She smiled. "So you're saying I was right all along?" "I'm saying you were necessary," he replied. She leaned her head on his shoulder quietly. "You know, I used to draw people to remember them. Now I draw light to remember what they gave me." "Then draw this," he said softly. She looked up at him. "This what, this moment?" "Why, because this is the one that stayed." Later that afternoon, a journalist visited to do a feature on the studio. She asked them both the inevitable question. How did this partnership start? Eli looked at Harper, letting her answer first. "Accidentally," she said. "A friend tricked me into a blind date." "And you stayed?" the journalist asked. Harper smiled at Eli. "Not out of pity," she said simply. The reporter chuckled, jotting down notes, not realizing the weight behind the words. When she left, Eli murmured, "You really love quoting yourself." "It's a good line," she teased. He nodded. "It's a true one." As evening fell, the students left and the studio emptied. Eli and Harper remained behind cleaning brushes, organizing sketches and shutting down lights. When the last switch clicked, the room bathed in the amber glow of sunset. Harper turned to him. "Do you ever think about how far we've come every day?" he said. And I still can't believe I almost let you walk away." She smiled faintly. "You didn't let me. I just had to learn what silence was for." "And what was it for listening?" she said. "To what mattered." He reached for her hand, his fingers threading through hers. "Then promise me one thing," he said. "Don't ever go quiet again." She squeezed his hand. "Not as long as you keep the tea warm." They stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the bay. The same view that once symbolized isolation now felt like promise. The sky blushed pink and gold. Harper leaned against the railing, the wind catching her hair. Eli moved beside her, his chair stopping at just the right distance. "It's funny," she said. "People used to think love had to be loud, dramatic storms and fireworks. Turns out it's just this, what two people showing up, again and again." He nodded. "Love that stays, exactly." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You know what the hardest part of loving you was? What convincing you it wasn't charity." He smiled faintly. "And the hardest part of loving you was realizing I never had to earn it." She reached out, tracing the edge of his hand. "Then we're even." The sun sank lower, painting their faces with the last of its light. Eli's voice broke the quiet. "Do you ever wonder what people think when they see us?" She laughed, probably still arguing online. "Good," he said. "Let them. Maybe they'll finally argue about something that matters, like how love doesn't need fixing, just understanding." She looked at him long and deep. "That's our next project then. What is teaching the world to see?" The city lights began to flicker on one by one. Below them, the sign of the Sunlight Studio glowed softly through the dusk. Harper turned to go back inside, but Eli caught her wrist lightly. "Wait," he said, "one more thing. What you still haven't signed our first drawing together." She smiled. "You sign it, you coded it." "No," he said, "you finish it." She picked up a pencil from the table beside the door and bent over the framed drawing of the sunrise they'd made the day she returned. At the bottom, she wrote 2 initials intertwined H and E. When she looked up, tears glimmered in her eyes. "There," she whispered, "now it's whole." He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Now it's home." As the night deepened, they stood in the doorway, watching the reflection of light shimmer across the water. Eli's voice came low and certain. "People thought pity kept us together," he said. "They were wrong. Pity fades, presence stays. Real love isn't pity. It's showing up when the world looks away." She smiled through her tears, resting her head against his. "Then we'll keep showing up." The camera of memory pulled back the studio, glowing like a lantern in the dark. The couple silhouetted against the city they had both forgiven. The final image was not a kiss, but a simple stillness, the kind that says everything. Love that doesn't rescue, love that stays. If this story touched something inside you tonight, pause for a moment before you scroll away and ask yourself, when was the last time you stayed? Not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Stories like Harper and Eli's remind us that love isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, consistent, and unglamorous. Sometimes it's just 2 people showing up for each other when no one else does. If you've ever been in love that didn't look perfect on paper but felt real in your bones, this story was for you. And if you're still waiting for someone who sees you the way Harper saw Eli, someone who doesn't try to fix you but simply sits with you in the silence, don't give up. Healing love exists. It's not in fairy tales or movies. It's in the small choices that whisper, "I'm here," when the world turns away. We built this story for you, our Soul Stories family, because we know that deep down you crave something more than fantasy. You crave truth that still believes in hope. And if that truth found you tonight, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from: Seattle, Houston, Trinidad, New York, or maybe somewhere quiet where love still grows slowly, like light through rain. Your stories matter too. Maybe you've been Harper, the one who stayed when the world said leave. Or maybe you've been Eli, the one learning to believe that he deserves to be seen again. Either way, your voice belongs here. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you never miss another journey like this one. Every week, we bring you cinematic love stories, written for the heart, not the algorithm stories, about second chances, imperfect people, and love that heals instead of hurts. Tap that subscribe button, hit the bell, and join thousands of others who believe that compassion is still powerful. And if you want to help more people find their way back to hope, share this story. One share could be the reason someone doesn't give up tonight. Now tell us in the comments what part of Harper and Eli's story stayed with you the most. Was it the cafe scene where he said, "You don't have to stay if it's out of pity"? Was it the gala where she refused to let pity define him? Or was it that final quiet moment where love became something steady enough to last? Rate the story from 0 to 10 and tell us why. We read every single comment because your words keep this channel alive. Till next time, remember what Eli said at the end: pity fades, presence stays. Keep showing up for the people who matter. Keep believing that love, even in silence, can still save us. And as always, this is Emma from Soul Stories signing off with one last question. If love could hear you tonight, what would you say back to it?